David tapped the steering wheel of his luxury SUV, impatience pulsing through his veins. He was late for an important meeting, one that could define the next quarter for his company, and each passing minute felt like a personal insult. The route he'd taken was a narrow, rural road, winding past endless fields of tall grass and sun-scorched farmland. Although his GPS insisted this back road was the quickest way to the main highway, David already regretted choosing it. The midday heat bore down through the windshield, and he found himself perspiring in his tailored suit, despite blasting the air conditioning. Then came the jolt, a sudden thump-thump that rattled the frame of the car. The steering pulled hard to the right. He braked, maneuvering onto the shoulder as a dreadful realization sank in. A flat tire. Perfect, he thought bitterly, stepping outside into a wall of scorching air. The high grass rustled around him. As he crouched to inspect the damage, dust swirled around his polished shoes. The tire's sidewall was shredded beyond salvage. "This is just what I need," David muttered under his breath. He pulled out his phone, only to see no service blink on the screen. In his world, tires were changed by assistants or roadside crews. He certainly wasn't used to doing it himself, and out here, help was in short supply. Kicking at a stray stone, he stared up the road, half expecting a passing car or at least a farmhouse where he could use a phone. But the road was empty as far as the eye could see. A trickle of old memories surfaced, standing on a highway as a young man, no resources, no one willing to stop. Back then, he'd vowed never again to be at the mercy of chance or strangers. He had transformed himself into a self-made millionaire, building layers of protection around his life. And yet, here he was, stranded and helpless, his carefully crafted safety net failing him in the simplest of predicaments. It was so funny to think of the orc pyramid of peril hazards, building layers of predicaments. Suddenly, a dark silhouette emerged from the heat shimmer in the distance. As it drew closer, David realized it was a teenage boy, maybe 14, wearing a worn-out t-shirt and dusty sneakers. The boy approached with a casual stride. "Hey, mister," he called, stopping a few steps from David's SUV. "Need help with that tire?" "Hi," David exhaled, feeling a curious mix of relief and annoyance. He wasn't eager to rely on a kid, but he had no other options. Yeah, I do. Tire's flat, and I don't have a phone signal." The boy, whose name David would soon learn was Lucas, crouched and peered at the mangled rubber. "Got a spare in the back?" "Yeah, under the cargo floor." "Cool, I can swap it. My dad showed me how. You might want to stand back if you've never done it before." David blinked, a little taken aback by the boy's confidence. Still, he opened the hatch, retrieving the spare, a jack, and a lug wrench. Lucas slid to his knees on the dusty ground and, in a matter of minutes, had the shredded tire off and the spare on. David hovered, unsure whether to offer help or just watch. "You're pretty good at this," he murmured. Lucas shrugged, tightening the lug nuts. "Done it a bunch. A big deal." In no time, the job was done. David was so accustomed to paying for every service that he reflexively pulled out his wallet and tried to hand the boy a handful of bills. But Lucas stepped back, palms raised in refusal. "Nah, I don't want your money. You needed help. I helped. Simple as that." David was stunned. He tried insisting, "At least let me buy you lunch. Something." But Lucas just shook his head with a grin. "I'm good. Take care, mister. Good luck." Then, as easily as he had appeared, he turned and wandered back down the dusty road. David stood there, holding the money, watching the boy's figure recede into the shimmering distance. Something in that moment left him unsettled, an act of generosity he hadn't expected and didn't know how to process. He climbed behind the wheel, down the rearview mirror. Lucas was gone. The entire drive home, David's mind replayed the encounter. He was a man who believed in transactions. You pay for a service, you get it. Yet this boy's kindness slipped right past that logic. It churned uncomfortable questions in David's mind, questions he couldn't simply dismiss. When he finally reached the comfort of his gated estate, David's wife Clara greeted him at the door. He noticed the creases of worry on his forehead. "You're late," she said gently. "Everything okay?" Flat tire, he replied. Some kid changed it for me. Wouldn't take a dime, just walked away. Clara gave a small, thoughtful smile. That's sweet, actually. People aren't usually so generous. He stepped around her, dropping his briefcase on the entryway table. Yeah, well, it's been on my mind all day. I offered him money, but he wouldn't have it. Clara followed him into the kitchen. He probably wasn't doing it for money, she suggested. Sometimes folks just help each other. David shrugged, still unsettled. It was dinner time, and their children, Ellie and Josh, both teenagers, joined them. While the kids chattered about school, David ate in silence, lost in thought. The story about the boy and the flat tire trickled out. Ellie was intrigued. Josh teased that maybe David had met someone with a bigger heart than his wallet. David shot him a look, but there was no malice behind it. Later, out in the backyard patio, David sipped a glass of water, eyes drifting over the manicured lawn. He should have been grateful for a quick fix to the car trouble, but something about the encounter aided him. For all his wealth and influence, he realized he'd grown unaccustomed to receiving pure kindness. He fell into a restless sleep that night, fixated on the boy's genuine smile. The next morning, David announced he was driving back to that same rural road. Clara, leaning over a cup of coffee, raised her eyebrows. You're going to find him? He nodded. I don't know why, I can't stop thinking about it. I never learned his name or anything. She considered him for a moment, then simply said, All right, be safe. David hopped into his SUV, this time wearing casual clothes instead of his usual designer suit, and retraced his route from the day before. The farmland looked different in the morning light, less oppressive and more hopeful. Soon, he recognized the spot where he'd pulled over. He slowed and scanned the roadside. Nothing, except tall grass shimmering in the breeze. Just as he was about to drive on, he noticed a small, weathered house tucked back from the road. A tangle of weeds grew in the front yard, and rusted toys lay scattered near the porch. He felt an inexplicable pull and decided to knock on the door. A woman answered, her expression one of confusion as she took in David's expensive watch and carefully groomed appearance. Can I help you? She asked. Clearing his throat, David spoke. I'm looking for a boy. Helped me with a flat tire yesterday. He's about 14. Lucas? She said, eyes widening. She called over her shoulder. Lucas. His face lit up in recognition. Hey, mister, you came back. David exhaled with relief. So your name's Lucas. Listen, I wanted to thank you. I don't think I properly did that yesterday. Lucas shot a quick glance at his mom, Raquel, who nodded for him to continue. I told you it wasn't a big deal, he said. Just a tire. David stepped forward, voice earnest. It was a big deal to me. You saved me an entire day of stress. And you refused my money. I want to do something for you, for your family, anything you need. Raquel's eyes flicked between Lucas and David. She crossed her arms, more guarded than her son. We manage, but thank you. David sensed her pride. He was once like that too. I understand. I'm not here to force anything on you. He hesitated, searching for the right words. Can I at least buy you both breakfast? Lucas perked up immediately. We might have enough for some eggs, he offered. You can come in if you want. Raquel gave an uncertain shrug but opened the door. David stepped into a modest, tidy living room that showed signs of wear. Peeling paint, worn carpet, a sagging couch. Still, it felt like a home. In the kitchen, he smelled coffee brewing. Raquel brought him a mug, while Lucas cracked eggs in a frying pan, moving with comfortable confidence. They shared a simple meal around a small wooden table. Star of the night. David felt oddly at ease. The conversation meandered, how Lucas learned to fix tires from his late father, how David had been on his way to a meeting. At one point, David noticed the drip of a leaky faucet and the spots of water damage on the ceiling. Clearly, the house needed work. Yet, mother and son were gracious, not apologetic. As David finished the last bite of scrambled eggs, he set down his fork and said softly, Let me fix the leak in your roof or that faucet. You helped me, I'd like to help you. Lucas's eyes flicked to Raquel. She sighed, then nodded. The roof's had a leak for a while, but don't go to any trouble. We can't pay for fancy repairs. I'm not looking to get paid back. Consider it my way of showing gratitude, sighed David. Anyway, climb up. My mom's left a hat and tear slider at the country club. I laid that leak myself. Raquel paused, then smiled. A relieved, weary expression. All right, she said, if that's what you want to do. When David returned home, he made immediate calls to a few construction contacts. Arranging contractors and pricing for a small repair was child's play compared to his usual business deals, and he felt a rare surge of excitement. This wasn't about profit or status. It was about real, tangible help. By day's end, he'd scheduled a crew to assess Raquel's roof and see what else needed fixing. Clara, noticing his unusual enthusiasm, listened with curiosity. You're really serious about repairing their house, aren't you? It's not just a house, David replied. It's their home, and it's falling apart. She studied him for a moment. You know, if everyone had a spark of that kid's kindness, the world would be better. Maybe that's what's lighting you up. He gave a self-conscious shrug, but didn't deny it. Strange as it seemed, Lucas's selflessness had flipped a switch in him. A few days later, David parked in front of Raquel's place, accompanied by Greg, a burly foreman he trusted. Lucas bounded out to greet them. Hey, mister, glad you came back. Greg walked around the house, scribbling notes on a clipboard. He found multiple issues: water damage in the attic, rotting shingles, questionable wiring. Raquel looked mortified by the house's condition, yet David reassured her that they would manage it all, step by step. Lucas trailed behind Greg, fascinated by his tools and asking questions about carpentry. The most recent event was her wedding. She wanted to make sure everything went well. He drove them back to the neighborhood. David noticed the boy's genuine curiosity. He reminded David of himself at that age, except David had been obsessed with finding a way out of poverty, while Lucas seemed driven to help. We'll start on the roof, Greg announced, then tackle any structural rot. David nodded. Perfect, let's do it. I'll cover the costs. Raquel pressed her lips together. That's too much. I only expected a small patch for the worst leak. David met her gaze. I promised I'd help. This is me keeping that promise. She blinked hard, fighting back tears. I don't know how to thank you. You already did, David said. Remembering the meal they shared, the first day of repairs, David arrived in work jeans and boots, surprising even Greg with his willingness to pitch in. Usually, David's staff handled everything. But this time, he wanted to experience the labor himself. If Lucas could kneel in dust to change a stranger's tire, David could climb a ladder and hammer nails. Sweat dripped down his forehead. The muscles in his arms, unaccustomed to physical labor, ached. Lucas, on the other hand, seemed overjoyed to help. He scurried across the yard, hauling shingles or handing up tools, and Raquel popped in and out, offering water, her eyes brimming with gratitude as she saw how meticulously the crew worked. Word spread through the rural neighborhood about what was happening at the worn-down house on the old back road. A few curious faces peeked from passing cars. Some neighbors who knew Raquel from the grocery store offered to lend a hand. Bit by bit, the street took on a sense of communal excitement. David couldn't recall the last time he felt so connected. As the week went on, the roof repairs progressed, and David realized he looked forward to being there each day more than any corporate meeting in his high-rise office. Over lunch, eaten on Raquel's battered front porch, he spoke with Lucas about big dreams and small details, and how he once wanted to be an engineer. That's the name for it, I think. Fixing old bikes. And how he once wanted to be an engineer. You can do it, David said, sincerely. If you ever need help, recommendations, resources, let me know. Lucas's grin beamed. Thanks, mister. You really think I could be one? Absolutely. You're bright and you've got the drive. That's half the battle. Internally, the conversation made David reflect on his own kids, Ellie and Josh. He realized he rarely spent this kind of one-on-one time with them. Ambition had driven him to long office hours, chasing success. Now, ironically, manual labor on a stranger's house brought out paternal instincts he hadn't recognized in himself. Meanwhile, Clara noticed David returning home each evening, looking sweaty, exhausted, but oddly content. He'd gush about how Lucas had climbed onto the roof with Greg, or how they discovered a leak in the attic that explained the moldy smell in Raquel's hallway. Their children listened with interest. Even teenage cynicism couldn't hide Ellie's curiosity. She wanted to meet this Lucas. Josh insisted he could help with any painting if needed. Clara, too, felt a stir of pride. For years, David had thrown himself into making money. Now he was throwing himself into making a difference. She reminded him not to neglect his own family obligations and Josh's soccer game, so she didn't try to dissuade him. Deep down, she understood how important this was for David's heart. Of course, complications arose. Greg uncovered rotting beams that required more intense repairs than planned. David didn't blink at the extra costs, but Raquel grew uneasy, believing she was imposing. She tearfully insisted she'd be fine with just a patch job. David pulled her aside. "You welcomed me into your home when you had every right to turn me away. Let me do this properly?" She nodded, swallowing hard. Slowly, by picking up her phone again, she messaged Ernest. He called out, "It's just a lot of generosity. More than we've ever known." Lucas listened quietly. His father's passing had left them in precarious circumstances, and they'd learned to manage with little. Accepting help, especially on this scale, didn't come naturally. Yet David's earnestness wore down their reluctance. One evening, as the structural repairs neared completion, Raquel insisted on cooking a full dinner for David and the crew. And then she scrounged together groceries, determined to show gratitude beyond words. The living room was still half disassembled, tools stacked against the wall, but she set a makeshift table with mismatched plates. After settling in, I had started working on refurbishment. Matt and I are having a lot of fun with this. Again, it was a humble meal, roast chicken, rice, vegetables, but the atmosphere was warm. The chatter of hammers and saws gave way to the clink of forks on plates. David found himself laughing alongside Greg, recounting a moment when Lucas nearly toppled a box of shingles. Lucas playfully rolled his eyes, proclaiming it an accident that ended fine. In that small living room, with the fading evening light streaming through newly patched windows, David felt a quiet contentment, unlike anything he'd known in his glossy suburban mansion. After dinner, he helped wash dishes, a task he rarely performed at home. Rahel teased him, marveling at how a wealthy man could handle a simple sponge. He joked back, finding it surprisingly pleasant to be teased as a friend, not flattered as a boss. But not really. The small steps that build his courage. He just never stopped doing them. Meanwhile, David's business acquaintances wondered where he was spending so much time. Whispers circulated that David had found a new charity project. Some guessed he might be trying to buy cheap real estate. Others ridiculed him for wasting time on a worthless house. David ignored them. For the first time, he felt sure that intangible rewards could outweigh any corporate profit. His children grew more intrigued by stories of Lucas. One weekend, David brought Ellie and Josh to see the house in person. Lucas welcomed them excitedly, showing Ellie the half-finished attic where Greg was reinforcing beams and swapping jokes with Josh over their favorite YouTube videos. Raquel served them lemonade, smiling at how quickly the kids got along. Ellie, a natural musician, asked to paint some of the living room walls, offering to add subtle decorative touches. The purchase, which that called ranked up the price since he'd been paying. Josh offered to carry lumber. Before long, David's family was working side by side with Lucas and Raquel, bridging the gap between their previously disconnected worlds. As the renovations continued, neighbors started pitching in too. Someone dropped off extra paint. A local handyman offered a used but sturdy countertop that fit Raquel's kitchen perfectly. The place transformed bit by bit from leaky and worn to bright and functional. Each improvement represented not just structural changes, but the blossoming of a community spirit that had been dormant. Lucas reveled in the changes. He confessed he'd never imagined living in a house without drips, squeaky floors, or flickering lights. Seeing his happiness propelled David to do even more, insulating the walls, replacing old windows to keep out drafts, upgrading the plumbing so hot water could run in the winter without fail. The budget ballooned beyond David's original plan. but he found he didn't mind in the slightest. So Clara watched from the sidelines, heartened. She saw a new lightness in David's step, as though he too were shedding some internal burdens he'd carried for years. 3 weeks into the renovation, with the roof complete and the kitchen nearly finished, David arrived at Raquel's house to finalize the flooring in the living room. Parking his shiny black SUV in the driveway, he stepped out into the sunshine, a spool of electrical wire in hand. Just then, he noticed a small crowd of neighbors gathered, casting curious glances. A swirl of gossip had evidently drawn them to see the near-completed transformation. Lucas bounded over, beaming. "Hey, mister, you're here early." David grinned. Couldn't wait to see how the new flooring looks. He opened the trunk to retrieve a few planks, but paused when Raquel appeared on the porch, her brow furrowed, as though something was on her mind. "Mr. David," she began, voice wavering, "you've done so much. I'd never want to seem ungrateful, but are you sure about all these extra improvements? I mean, the insulation, the bigger water heater, even the new bedroom windows for Lucas. It's beyond what we expected." David's eyes flicked to Lucas. He remembered the boy's unwavering smile on that lonely road. "If you're worried I'm overextending, don't. This is my choice. Let me finish what we started." She nodded slowly. "All right," she whispered, tears welling. "Thank you." David was about to respond when the crunch of tires on gravel turned heads. Another gleaming black SUV pulled up behind David's. For a split second, everyone was silent, uncertain who it could be. And then the door opened and Clara stepped out, flanked by Ellie and Josh. They emerged, carrying groceries and a few boxes of supplies. "Figured you could use some extra hands," Clara called, flashing a warm smile. Ellie waved to Lucas, and Josh hopped onto the porch, brandishing paintbrushes. In that moment, the entire property felt alive, with life, laughter, and the forging of new bonds. Over the next several days, the final elements of the renovation fell into place. Greg and his crew laid fresh flooring in the living room and replaced the warped boards on the front porch steps. Anna, another contractor, meticulously patched drywall and repainted the worn walls in a soft cream color. Lucas darted around, helping each worker in turn, handing them nails or offering to hold boards in place. David found himself in the unusual role of assistant laborer, holding flashlights, carrying boxes, or even learning to install a light fixture under Greg's watchful eye. Despite the sweat and minor cuts on his hands, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. No corporate negotiation had ever sparked such genuine warmth in him. Ellie added her own touch of creativity, painting a small floral pattern in one corner of the living room, a subtle accent that drew the eye without overwhelming the space. Josh, more practical, assisted with furniture arrangement and discovered he had a knack for matching curtains to wall color. Clara pitched in by cleaning, cooking for the crew, and offering the moral support Raquel needed on days when it all felt too good to be real. While some neighbors embraced this transformation, others gossiped about David's motives. A pair of local busybodies speculated that David might be filming a documentary or planning to flip the house for profit. But those who'd actually spoken with him realized there was no hidden scheme, just a man inspired by a boy's genuine kindness. Meanwhile, Claire's friends in town praised her for supporting David's charitable streak and foster care agency. Some asked if they could volunteer their own time. Soon, half a dozen people stopped by on weekends to help paint or tidy the yard. Raquel, both flustered and grateful, tried to feed them all. The once silent street buzzed with comings and goings, giving Lucas and Raquel a sense of community they had never experienced before. One evening, as the living room neared completion, Raquel hosted a spontaneous little gathering to celebrate. The couch was still a hand-me-down, the coffee table scuffed, but the rest of the room gleamed with fresh paint and polished floors. Greg and a few of his crew came, as did neighbors. Clara brought a casserole. Ellie and Josh arrived with a homemade dessert. Lucas was practically bouncing with joy as he led people on a tour of the improved space. For David, this gathering felt surreal. A month ago, he was a stranger to this neighborhood, stranded with a flat tire. Now he sat in a circle of new friends, passing around plates of food in a place that brimmed with warmth. Even the memory of how he had originally refused to rely on strangers seemed laughable now. "You've changed my life, Mr. David," Raquel said during a lull in conversation. Her voice trembled with emotion, not just the house. "The way you've shown Lucas and me that people do care." And David tried to wave it off modestly. "Actually, you two changed mine." Lucas piped up, "Yeah, Mom, he said I changed everything by fixing that tire." That earned a round of good-natured laughter, with David patting Lucas's shoulder affectionately. A flicker of something deeper flashed across David's mind. He had one more surprise brewing, something he'd arranged behind the scenes, but he wasn't quite ready to reveal it. In the midst of this uplifting progress, however, friction emerged from David's corporate world. A few of his business partners cornered him, questioning where he'd been disappearing to and whether it impacted his work. "You're not flipping that house, right?" one colleague asked suspiciously. "Is the company's money tied up in this?" David kept his composure, explaining he was using his personal funds that had had no bearing on corporate accounts. Still, the confrontation troubled him. He recalled the cynicism that once defined his own mindset, that everyone wanted something in return. The memory stung because it reminded him how cynical he used to be, too. One afternoon, after a tense conference call, David confided in Clara. "They think I'm being conned, or that I'm trying some backdoor real estate deal. It's ridiculous." She rested a hand on his arm. "They just don't understand. Let them think what they want." He nodded, reflecting on how he'd once sought the approval of these peers. Now their ignorance seemed small by comparison to the joy he felt each time he saw Lucas or Raquel benefit from real improvements. At last, the day came when the project neared true completion. The house, once battered by leaks and rot, now stood solid and bright. The yard, once weedy and cluttered, looked neater thanks to neighbors' donated lawnmower and some volunteer yard work. Greg's crew had wrapped up the final touches that morning, caulking windows, installing a new front door. That evening, David called everyone together. Raquel, Lucas, his own family, Greg, the neighbors who had helped, ostensibly for a thank you barbecue in the front yard. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold and pink. And onlookers chattered by the fence. Raquel had never hosted so many people, but she wore a proud, anxious smile. Once everyone had a paper plate of food, David stood by the new porch steps and cleared his throat. "I just want to say, I'm grateful to each of you for making this possible. This house was never just about repairs. It was about community." A warm round of applause followed. Lucas gave him a thumbs up. David took a breath, glancing at Clara for encouragement. She nodded. "And there's something else I want to share." He pulled an envelope from his pocket. "Raquel, Lucas, this is for you." Frowning curiously, Raquel set aside her plate and took the envelope. She opened it carefully, her eyes scanning the set of documents. Then her mouth fell open. "This is a trust," David explained softly, meeting Lucas's wide eyes, "or Lucas's education, or however you see fit. It's not extravagant, but it should cover college or trade school, or if he wants to start a business someday." A hush swept the yard. Raquel stared at the papers, tears welling in her eyes. Lucas's voice came out a whisper. "You're giving us a college fund?" "I think it's something that we would have experienced anyway. David felt his own throat tighten. "Lucas, you helped me for nothing. I want you to have every chance to pursue your dreams. Consider this an investment in your future." Raquel choked back a sob. I can't possibly accept. This is too big." David shook his head. "Not for what you and Lucas have given me. I've discovered more meaning in this project than in years of business deals. Please, let me do this." A wave of emotion rippled through the crowd. Several neighbors dabbed at their eyes. Clara squeezed David's hand. Greg nodded approvingly. Ellie and Josh wore proud smiles. As for Lucas, he stood frozen, tears running freely now. He lunged forward and hugged David tight. "Thank you," he mumbled into David's shoulder. "Thank you so much." David returned the hug, feeling an overwhelming sense of completion, like the final puzzle piece had snapped into place. Word spread quickly that David had not only renovated the house, but set up a trust fund for Lucas. Some folks were astonished. Others were inspired, dropping by to commend David or see the newly finished home. New critics scoffed that he was showing off, but those who actually knew him recognized sincerity. For Raquel, relief and gratitude mingled with disbelief. She confided to Clara that she now dreamt of going back to school herself one day, or finding a better job since she no longer had to fear the next big household disaster. Lucas beamed whenever asked about his plans. "I might want to study engineering," he said. And he said, "So I'll leave. Or maybe start a mechanic shop. I don't know yet, but at least I have options." Each time he said it, David felt that same flutter of joy, recalling how it all started with a simple, unselfish act. With the house done, David's daily visits wound down. Greg and his crew moved on to other contracts. The lines of volunteers who'd once swarmed the yard disappeared. Life returned to a semblance of normalcy. Yet, it was a new normal for Raquel and Lucas. Stable roof, steady plumbing, no more fear of the floor giving way. One afternoon, David popped by for coffee. The porch steps, newly varnished, creaked pleasantly as he ascended. He found Raquel and Lucas in the living room, rearranging old furniture in their upgraded space. Sunshine streamed through the pristine windows, illuminating the simple, welcoming decor. "This place looks incredible," David said, marveling anew. "It's like a brand new home." Lucas smirked, with the same old people. But there was a lightness in his eyes. This was better than Raquel and Lucas flew here to do. His abilities are beyond what we thought we were missing. Raquel came around the corner, offering David a mug of coffee. "So, any regrets?" she teased, half joking. "Wish you hadn't stumbled onto us?" He sipped, shaking his head. "Not for a second. Meeting you two made me realize I'd been missing something." Her gaze softened. They were happy to notice who was in the car. They chatted about small matters, Lucas's upcoming school projects, Raquel's dream of finding a higher-paying job now that her home wasn't on the brink of collapse. David took it all in, certain that this was the best investment he had ever made. As he said goodbye, Lucas walked him out. A gentle breeze ruffled the tall grass near the road, as if saluting the journey they'd taken together. And on the drive home, David considered how the experience had shaped his own family. Ellie and Josh often asked about Lucas, curious if they could invite him over to their place. Clara noted how David seemed more present and less obsessed with work deadlines. Indeed, David felt a new kind of happiness had infiltrated their home, one that didn't revolve around money or prestige. He started planning for ways to keep supporting Raquel and Lucas from afar, whether that meant a check-in call each week or helping Lucas with summer internships. The boy had, after all, resurrected David's belief in pure generosity. Predictably, the high-profile associates in David's corporate sphere learned about his philanthropic endeavor. Surprisingly, some, those with more empathy, admired it. A few even sought him out for advice on charitable giving. Others, more cynical, shook their heads, concluding David had gone soft. David paid no heed to the naysayers. Their opinions seemed trivial. An article appeared in a local newsletter praising the businessman who rebuilt a neighborhood house. The journalist interviewed Raquel, who downplayed her own struggles, focusing on how she and Lucas simply did what they could for David that day with a tire, never imagining it would lead to this avalanche of kindness. The article highlighted the spontaneity of real human connections, resonating with readers. David tucked a copy of that newsletter into a drawer, labeling it as a keepsake, an unexpected marker of a life-changing event. Weeks passed, the renovations held up well, and David, his wife, and the kids invited Raquel and Lucas over to their own house. For the first time, Lucas had never seen such a spacious residence except on TV shows. The manicured lawn, the pristine pool, the tasteful furniture is another world. Yet David's family made a point to keep the atmosphere relaxed, urging Lucas to enjoy the game room or play soccer with Josh in the yard. Makila was struck by how welcoming they were. "You live so differently," she remarked quietly to Clara, "yet you've treated us like equals." Clara smiled. "You are equals. We just had different roads, that's all." During dinner, the two families swapped stories. Ellie and Lucas discovered a shared love for certain bands, jamming an impromptu tune on Ellie's keyboard. Josh taught Raquel a few soccer tricks. The evening ended with them roasting marshmallows by a fire pit, laughter echoing under the star-filled sky. David watched it all with a grateful heart. The line between their family and our family blurred in the best possible way. Eventually, time marched on, as it does. Lucas advanced in school, even eyeing a local college's summer program. Raquel saved extra money from her job, no longer burdened by emergency home repairs. David resumed a more balanced work schedule, but he never fully returned to being the man he was before. He'd awakened to the joy of purposeful giving. On a breezy autumn day, David drove past the now familiar road. He felt compelled to stop and reflect. Memories of his initial frustration, sweating in a suit, cursing that flat tire, mingled with the recollection of Lucas's easy grin. He smiled. If he'd never had that breakdown in the middle of nowhere, he might still be living behind a wall of cynicism. A text message pinged on David's phone. "Thanks again, Mr. David. You're the best." Lucas, possibly just a routine thank you for advice on a school project. But for David, it was a reminder of how a single, selfless act could spark an entire chain of transformation. He turned the SUV around and headed home, satisfied with life's unpredictability. A story that began with a teenager changing a millionaire's flat tire had evolved into something immeasurably bigger. A testament to the power of kindness, family, and the bridges built between hearts when wealth is measured not in dollars, but in compassion. Back on Raquel Street, neighbors still reminisced about the day a slick SUV first showed up for a stranded tire and how it led to the renewal of a modest house they all assumed would crumble one day. Some credited David for demonstrating that generosity wasn't just a hollow word. Others credited Lucas for reminding the world that simple kindness could alter a person's destiny. Months later, anytime David had reason to pass through that rural area, he'd find a reason to stop at Raquel's. And sometimes for a chat, sometimes to drop off new supplies or help with a small side project. He'd see the neighbor kids playing in the yard, the house shining with fresh paint, the windows open to the afternoon breeze, and he'd catch Lucas smiling at him, always greeting him with the same friendliness, as though this wealthy man was just another neighbor who come to call. In the grand scheme, the transformation of one old house might not look like much, but for David, Raquel, Lucas, and the entire neighborhood, it changed everything. It was a beacon of warmth in a world often overshadowed by suspicion and greed. It proved that any single act of kindness, no matter how small, could spark ripples that uplift many lives. Standing beside Lucas on that newly rebuilt porch, David reflected on the unlikeliest chain of events: a shredded tire on a blistering day, a teenage boy with a willingness to help, a proud millionaire who rediscovered the beauty of a humble connection. The details formed a tapestry of gratitude and hope, one that turned an ordinary roadside encounter into an unforgettable bond. And so the memory of that flat tire and the day a black SUV pulled into a dilapidated driveway would remain etched in their minds and hearts. It reminded them that sometimes all it takes is one genuine gesture to shift the course of many lives and to turn strangers into family. If you enjoyed this story, watch the next video for an even better one. And be sure to subscribe so you never miss our latest uploads.